Okay, so my name is Debasattam. I work in control and systems theory. Um, Today's lecture and tomorrow's lecture also by me is going to be something that might disappoint you a little, because I heard that some of you were looking for some techniques in linear algebra. Yeah, but our course is not going to be on linear algebra as such. It's going to be on commutative algebra, but at least there is algebra word in it, so it has something to do with, something. I hope that it's going to be hopeful, it's going to be helpful for you. Okay, so the title of my lecture would be commutative algebra. Can you see? Yeah. Well, commutative algebra is a vast subject, and it's far beyond the scope of this limited, time. Like just 2 lectures is not cannot do justice to this vast subject. So what we are going to do is we are going to restrict ourselves to only a very specific applications of commutative algebra to electrical engineering. Yeah, and one particular topic in electrical engineering, the one that perhaps all of us have faced in one point or the other, in some point of our life, that is solving differential equations. But once again, we are not going to look at just general differential equations. We are going to look at differential equations which are pretty, which are the simplest, you know, namely ordinary linear differential equations with constant coefficients. Okay. Now, since I did not have much knowledge about your background, and I believe that there is a a big wide spectrum of knowledge that you already have, so that is why I have kept the lectures at a very basic level. Yeah, so that might be a bit disappointing for many of you, I'm sure. So whenever you think that there is something that you already know, you can stop and tell me. I can go a little faster. On the other hand, if you think that something is, being it's going overhead, that time also you can stop me, and I can water it down sufficiently. Okay, and once again, you should stop me and ask me questions. Yeah, don't ever think that this is not a relevant question. This is a silly question. Not at all. I have not heard a silly question in my life. Yeah, so always, whenever you think that there is some doubt, just stop me and ask me questions. Okay, all right. So any question about the title? I hope not. So as I said, we are not going to look at linear algebra, but we are going to look at commutative algebra. Okay, just to start, how many of you have heard the term before, commutative algebra? Can you raise your hands? No one. Okay. How many of you know the origin of the word algebra? Algebra sounds like zebra, the animal. Yeah? A mud between horse and, it looks like a horse. Nothing to do with zebra though. Algebra actually has origin in Arabic. In Arabic, the word is aljabr. It means shuffle up things. Yeah, to jumble up things. So algebra, uh, in a colloquial term, algebra means that you just play around with symbols. Okay. So with these playing around with symbols, this transformed into playing around with equations. Yeah, you add equations, or you add numbers, you subtract numbers, you multiply numbers, or you multiply symbols. Yeah, that gave rise to the idea of algebra. So linear algebra, now when you prefix, so algebra means that you play around with these symbols or numbers. Yeah, when you say linear algebra, there is some linearity concept involved in it. When you say commutative algebra, Obviously, once again, it's just playing around with numbers or symbols, but now the linearity part is something that we are going to, we're not going to concentrate on. We're going to look at something beyond linearity, something which may have some non-linearity in it. Okay, we'll see those things in detail, what commutative algebra is, how commutative algebra comes into being when we are faced with the challenge of solving differential equations, how it plays any role in electrical engineering, and so on. But first we start with the basic problem that we are going to solve, that we are going to see how one can solve in this course. Okay, so the problem is very simple. We want to solve differential equations. All right, now how does a differential equation look like? Well, you see, a general differential equation with constant coefficient can be written as an dny dtn plus an minus 1 dn minus 1 y dtn minus 1 plus dot 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 a1 y a1 dy dt plus a0 is equal to 0. A standard differential equation looks like this. Now, how do you solve this equation? Okay, perhaps you have heard of, do you know how to solve this equation? I'm sure many of you already know how to solve this equation. You look at the complementary function, right? You replace this d dt by some symbol, it becomes a polynomial, you find out its roots. Then you look at, suppose lambda is a root, you look at e to the power lambda t. Yeah, so if there are these lambda 1, lambda 2 up to lambda n, these many roots are there. Then you look at e to the power lambda 1 t, e to the power lambda 2 t, and so on, and you look at a linear combination of it, and you say that this is my general solution. You find out those coefficients of that linear combination by putting the initial conditions, right? Am I right? Okay, but it turns out that when you are dealing with such a general equation, in engineering, I'm sure you have seen that solving an equation may not be all. You may be interested in other properties of the solution. You look at all possible solutions of that set, and you might ask questions like, okay, what is the stored energy of the system? Yeah, what is the memory of the system? Okay, now if I want to play around with this system and I want some specific solutions to occur in practical situation, I want to control the system, how will I do it? It turns out that in various such questions, systems theoretic questions, it is much more helpful to look at a first order version of this equation. Yeah, this equation in general is an nth order differential equation. Oh, by the way, if you feel like not taking any notes, that is also fine, because I've already prepared course notes for this lecture. I'm going to make them available on my web page, and also it will. I have talked to Professor Gadre, and he has assured that it's going to be put on the TechQuip Kite web page also. Yeah, let me write down my web page so that you can get it downloaded from there. Okay, just look for the link. I'm sure you'll be able to find out the relevant link for this paper, for this document. All right. So where were we? First order equations. Yeah. Yeah, it's a tilde. Yeah. So first order equations. So it turns out that first order equations are much easier to handle, not only for solving the equations, but also to get some systems theoretic properties, some clear picture about the system theoretic properties of the system of equations. For example, it is much easier to visualize the solution if the equation is given in a first order form. For example, suppose you have two variables x1 and x2, and you have this first order equation dx1 dt dx2 dt. This is given by, let's say, x2, and this is equal to minus x1. Okay. you see in this case I can actually draw what is known as the vector field, the velocity vector field. Indeed, suppose I have represented x1 and x2 in these two axes, okay, then a general point on the space, okay, is given by this pair x1 x2, which can be some point. It turns out that, see, suppose this is my initial condition, that at time t equal to 0 I am at this point, then at this point I can find out what is the velocity, and that velocity is given by x2 minus x1 from this equation. Like for example, suppose my initial point was here, what would be the velocity at this point? Suppose this point is just 1 0, then if we do 1 0, if I look at x2 minus x1, it's going to be 0 minus 1. So at this point I can locate the vector 0 minus 1. 0 minus 1 has 0 x component and minus 1 y component, x2 component. So the velocity, direction of the velocity would be this, correct? What if I am here? This point is, let's say, given by 0 minus 1, sorry. 0 minus 1, if I do once again x2 minus x1, I'm going to get minus 1 and 0, right? So this is going to be something like this. Similarly, at this point I'll have a velocity like this, at this point I'll have a velocity like this. In between also I can get these velocities drawn, and you see the general trend. In fact, you can connect these dots and you get a circle, and that is the general solution for this differential equation. If you are at this initial condition, you will circle around right like this. If you have this initial condition, you circle around like this. This is just one example. You know, in general, a first order differential equation would look something like this is the convention. X1 dot means derivative with respect to time for the x1 variable. This is the first order equation. Involving two variables, okay, first order linear differential equation. See, this is just one particular case of a 2 by 2 system. It could be an n by n system in general, and the general differential equation is written as x1 x2 x3 up to xn. This matrix we can denote it by a matrix A. It looks like, those who have done control would have already recognized this equation. This is a state space equation, yeah, and this is a particular type of a system. It's called autonomous system because there is no input to this system. This system evolves only because of its initial condition. Yeah, is this fine? Am I going too slow, or is it okay? It's okay, fine. Are there any questions? Okay, so the problem that we are going to look at in this course will mostly surround this particular fact, that will mostly surround this particular issue, that given a general high order differential equation, how do you convert it into a first order, an equivalent system of first order equations? So as I was saying, first order equations are much easier to solve. They're easier to pictorially see what is going on, like the one that we have just seen. And as I was mentioning, that they are also good at deciphering things like how much stored energy is there, what is the memory of the system, yeah, and these sort of things. All these details you can find out in the references mentioned in this course note that I have prepared. Yeah, there are nice books mentioned in the reference. If you want more details about state space representations, what are their benefits, yeah, those can be found out in the textbooks. Okay. The question that we are going to answer here is, given a high order differential equation, how do we convert it into an equivalent first order equation? So what is a general equation? Well, a general equation looks like this. As we have already written, before, the general equation looks like this. How do we convert this equation into an equation that looks like x dot equal to ax? Does anyone know about how to go about solving this problem?
Phase variable form.
Phase variable form. Perfect. So we define these new extra state variables, which are called phase variables, in the following manner. Before we do that, we must notice this particular intricacy. Very simple point to notice, but important. We notice that if the system has order n, it means this coefficient an is non-zero. Right? This coefficient an has to be non-zero in order for this to have an order equal to n. So if an is non-zero, we can divide out by an, right? And we can convert this equation into this equivalent equation. Well, you see, dividing this equation by a constant, by a non-zero constant, does not change the solutions, which means it's an equivalent system of it's an equivalent equation. So we say two system of equations are equivalent to each other if the solution sets are the same. Okay, so here the solution does not change, so that is why we can, instead of looking at the first equation, we can look at this equation. We divide out by the non-zero constant an. Yeah, from now on we are not going to bother about this an anymore. We are just going to look at this equation. We are just going to assume that an is equal to 1. Yeah, such an expression is called a monic differential equation, because the highest degree coefficient is 1. Now once we have this monic differential equation, just a single differential equation, as our friend pointed out, what is your name, sir? Rajnikant. Okay, good. Well, who else other than Rajnikant? Yeah. So Rajnikant says that we can look at the phase variables. So how do we look at the phase variables? Well, we first define this new variable x1. By the way, this notation means that it's by definition. X1 is equal to, we are defining x1. We are defining x1 to be equal to y. We define x2 to be equal to y dot. We define x3 to be equal to, so if it is y dot, then it's also x1 dot, as you can see. We define x3 to be equal to d square y dt squared, which means it's going to be dx2 dt, and so on. It continues up to xn, which we define to be equal to dn minus 1 y dt n minus 1. Okay, so from here we notice the following. What can we say about the derivative of the first variable x1 dot? X1 dot is equal to, you see, it's x2. What can we say about x2 dot is equal to x3? X3 dot is equal to x4, and it continues. But can it continue forever? Well, let's see. We can write down xn minus 1 dot, which would be equal to d dt of xn minus 1 is d n minus 2 dt n minus 2 of y, which is equal to xn, because it's going to be the next derivative, which is dn minus 1. It's by definition xn. What about xn dot? you can notice that xn is defined as dn minus 1 dtn minus 1 of y. So we are differentiating that again, which is nothing but dn y dt n minus dtn. But we don't have any ready-made expression for it like we were doing before. What we have to do is we have to look at the original equation that we had. Yeah, what was the original equation? Our original equation was dn dtn plus an minus 1 dn minus 1 y dtn minus 1 plus dot 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 up to a1 dy dt plus a0 is equal to 0, which tells us that dny dtn is equal to minus a0 y minus a1 dy dt minus a2 d square y dt squared minus continues minus an minus 1 dn minus 1 y dtn minus 1. Another way of writing it would be minus a0. We notice that y is equal to x1, dy dt is x2, minus a2 x3 continues minus an minus 1 xn. Yeah, so we have n minus 1 equations here, and we have this one equation here. So together we have a system of n equations, and that system of n equations can be written as x1 dot x2 dot x3 dot xn dot, okay, xn minus 1 dot xn dot. Zero, 1, all zeros, x1, x2, x3, xn minus 1, xn. 0, 0, 1, all zeros. The trend continues like this. We have 0, 0, 0, 1 here. And the last row is minus a0, minus a1, minus a2, up to minus an minus 1. This is the so-called phase variable canonical form, sometimes also called a controller canonical form, with a B there when there is control input, sometimes also called companion form. Don't ask me why, I don't know the origin of this name companion. For the phase variable I do know the origin though, because phase variable came from physics, where there is position and momentum together. They are taken as a phase variable because they denote the phase of the system. They tell us about the phase of the system. That is why when you take a variable, its position and its derivative like momentum, yeah, you call those state variables as phase variables. So here also we looked at x, if we call it a position, then we look at x dot, which is velocity, x double dot, which is acceleration. We keep them together, all of them together. Yeah, we take those as our variables, as our state variables. That's why we call them the phase variables. Okay, fine. This was very simple. The question that arises now is, okay, in practical situations we can often have system of equations. Instead of a single equation, we might have a system of equations. How do we obtain a first order representation, a state variable representation, or a phase variable representation for such a situation? Like, suppose we have a differential equation which looks like, okay, d cube y dt cube plus dy dt plus y is equal to 0. Together with this, suppose we also have this equation d4y dt4 plus d square y dt square plus say 2 times dy dt plus 3 times y is equal to 0. And suppose y has to satisfy both the equations. In that case, how do we obtain a first order representation? Well, for nonlinear differential equations also, the first method that we looked at, that's going to work if there is a single equation. Yeah, but once again one has to notice that it should be of the form that, you know, that dn, so just to digress, dny dtn, that we must be able to write down as a nonlinear function of y dot so on up to yn minus 1. So this guy appears solo, then it is possible to write down that system of equations.
But if they just square something like that,
then it's difficult.
Square root can be taken for this.
Square root makes it much more difficult. Yes, square root cannot be taken. Yeah. Okay, but there are various tricks that one can do for nonlinear systems. In this course, of course, we are going to look at just linear differential equations.
When should go with state space form?
Pardon?
When should go with this form?
When should we go with this form, the state space form? Well, as I was saying, that whenever you have a higher order system of equations, it is always a good idea to convert it into a first order equation. The textbooks don't talk about this problem as much as they should, because you know, since the 1960s, this first order equations have become so much popular and so much predominant that it is always assumed that our system of equations is given in the first order form. In fact, in any nonlinear dynamical system book that you pick, you will always see that the equation is given in this form: x dot is equal to fx u. They will always assume that it's first order. No one answers the question that if it is not first order, how do we bring it down to first order in various situations? Correct? But we'll see in this lecture that there are ways of, I mean, if we are puzzled with this problem, that we were looking for a first order differential equation, but we did not find one. How can we get a first order differential equation, a system of first order differential equations, using some commutative algebraic techniques? Yeah. Such pair of equations? Yeah. So like, for example, good that this question was asked. For example, suppose we have a network where there is a capacitance, some capacitor, yeah, electrical network, and we are interested in the voltage across the capacitor and how it is changing dynamically. Now, that capacitor can be a part of multiple loops, right? So you consider one loop, you apply KVL, you get one equation involving V and its derivatives. Okay, that the variable we are interested in. You look at another loop, you apply the same KVL equation, you get another equation involving that same variable V. If there is another loop, you will get another equation involving V. Ultimately, if you are interested in only this particular variable V, you are going to end up getting many equations involving the same variable. So V has to satisfy multiple system of differential, multiple differential equations all at the same time, all simultaneously. Yeah, and that can happen not only for this electrical network system, it can happen in any mechanical system or anything. There could be multiple equations. Yeah, and in fact it becomes more visible when you have multiple variables having multiple equations. Here, to keep our things simpler, we have chosen only to work with single variables, multiple equations, but one can have multiple variable, multiple equations. Yeah, the so-called multiple input, multiple output systems, where suppose you shut off the input, only outputs are there, then there will be multiple variables and multiple equations. The question is, so this question is, I don't know how many of you know about this, I'm sure many of you know about it. When you have linear equations, you try and get an independent system of linear equations, right? Like suppose you have 10 variables and 15 equations. 10 variables, 15 equations, suppose it's a homogeneous system, so Ax equal to 0, B is not there, B is equal to 0. You know that this 15 equations, 5 of them can be got rid of at least. Yeah, it is possible that you can get rid of more equations when it's an underdetermined system, but if it's an overdetermined system, you can always get rid of these dependent equations. Yeah, but those are linear equations. Can we do the same thing for differential equations also? Yeah, in differential equations, is there an idea of getting rid of dependent equations? Is it possible to get only an independent set of equations? Is it making sense? So that is what we are trying here. Yeah.
How is this method different from?
Not at all. But yeah, not at all. It's not different from transform domain. But once again, in transform domain, you have to be careful. I mean, so this same question arises there also. In transform domain, if you look at this equation, so this will be s cubed, this will be s, this will be 1, and there will be corresponding initial conditions on the right side. Similarly here, how do you solve this multiple system of equations? You can write it down as a matrix in the matrix form. Yeah. So now instead of a transfer function, you will have a transfer function matrix. Correct. So on the left hand side, you will have ys, a vector acting on ys is equal to some vector involving the initial conditions. So it's like one variable and two equations. Is it possible to get rid of one equation and keep only one? Okay. So what do you think? What is your guess? Can you get rid of dependent equations, or is there an idea of dependency of equations? Take a wild guess. I just want some answers. So like here I have given two concrete differential equations. One is a third order, another is a fourth order. We have to solve the simultaneous set of equations. We have to solve both of them together. How do we do it? Is it possible to, let's say, is it possible that I say, okay, this is a third order equation, order is less than 4, get rid of this one, solve only this. Is that enough? Or I might say, okay, this is higher order, this is smaller order, so if something solves the smaller order one, it should definitely solve the higher order one. So I get rid of the higher order one and solve only the third order equation.
But if you differentiate the first equation,
okay,
by 1,
correct,
then it will give me d raised to 4y by
correct,
dt 4 that part plus d square y by dt square,
correct,
plus dy by dt equal to 0.
So
that part we can put it in the second equation,
okay,
and solve further.
So we can do the following, as you were saying. What is your name? Shaurin. Shaurin. Okay. As Shaurin is suggesting that okay, we can differentiate the first equation. That will make a d4 y dt4 appear in the first equation also. And then, if I understand correctly, we can subtract the two equations, right? And we can get a second order equation. In fact, a first order equation straight away. So why don't we change it to d square? Yeah, we get something. We play around with these two equations and we get one equation. So suppose we multiply this by okay, let's not make it first d square, let us keep it the way it is. So suppose Let us make it 2, so that it's easier, so the point gets through. So suppose we give this as equation, name as equation 1, this is equation 2, and suppose we differentiate this once. So we get d. By the way, this is ridiculous to write all this d dt's all the time. So we are going to use this Greek letter xi to denote the derivative d dt. So if I have xi to the power n, it means the nth derivative. Yeah. So whenever we are playing around with the equations, we're going to use just xi. So xi is like a nickname for d dt in its friend circle. Yeah. All right. So the first equation has xi cube plus 2 xi plus 1, and the second equation has okay, suppose we multiply this by xi, so we get xi to the power 4. That's like differentiating once. This is 2 xi squared plus xi. This is what? This has been done by multiplying xi to equation number 1. Then what we do is, suppose we take equation 2 and subtract xi times equation number 1. This gives us, so xi to the power, so equation 4 is xi to the power 4 plus xi squared plus 2 xi plus 3, and we subtract minus xi to the power 4 minus 2 xi squared minus xi. What do we get? Well, we get xi to the power 4, xi to the power 4 cancels out. We have minus xi squared, we have plus xi plus 3, which tells us we have this quadratic equation d square y dt squared plus dy dt plus 3y is equal to 0. So this is a new equation, equation number 3, and which has been obtained from equation 1 and equation 2. Now here is the question. I solve for equation number 3. What can I say about the solution in connection with the solutions of 1 and 2? I say the following: if y is a solution of 1 and 2, this guarantees that y is also a solution of equation number 3. Can we say the other way around? Can we say that if y is a solution of equation number 3, it should also be a solution of equation number 1 and 2? Well, it's not clear. It's not clear at all. In fact, it need not be always. So then what do we do? So let us just realize at this point that it's not an easy thing to answer. That given a system of equations, this was still just 2 equations. Suppose we have multiple equations. It is not easy at all to answer. Can this system of equations be brought down to just a single differential equation? Like we get rid of dependent equations in linear system of equations, whether the same thing is applicable to differential equations or not. It turns out that it is indeed possible. Given multiple equations, you can obtain just a single differential equation whose solution, whose solution set is exactly same as the solution set of the multiple system of equations. But that requires work, and that is what we are going to learn in this course. That is where commutative algebra comes into the picture. So as you can see, we are already playing with equations. So we are already doing some algebra with the equations, and we are going to carry it forward. In order to carry this forward, this operation of taking equations, differentiating, adding, subtracting, in order to do that formally, we need this idea of what is known as a commutative ring. Have you heard of this term, commutative ring? How many of you have heard of this term, a commutative ring? Please raise your hands. Okay, not too many people. Have you heard of a field? Field. How many of you have heard of a field? Not a vector field, a number field, let's say. Okay. So let me tell you what these things are. These are algebraic objects, and we are, all of us have already dealt with such things in our life without perhaps knowing the names. A field is a collection of things, let's say collection of numbers, where you can add, subtract, multiply, and divide by everything that is not 0, together with certain properties like addition is commutative. Yeah, there is a 0 element, which is such that if you add this 0 to any other element, you get back the element. There is additive, so that's called the additive identity. So there is something called an additive inverse, which is such that if alpha is an element, there is a minus alpha such that alpha plus minus alpha is equal to 0. Okay. Then addition is associative. That means if you have alpha, beta, and gamma, you add alpha, beta first and then add gamma, or you add beta plus gamma first and then alpha, you get back the same result. Then with multiplication, there is this multiplicative identity 1, such that if you multiply alpha to 1, you get back alpha. This multiplication is commutative. Okay. Then this multiplication is also associative, that is if you have alpha, beta, and then gamma, that is same as alpha and beta gamma. Yeah. And there is this inverse. If alpha is non-zero, there exists an alpha to the power minus 1, which is such that if you multiply the two together, you get the multiplicative identity. And this addition, so the multiplication distributes over the addition. That means if you have alpha times beta plus gamma, that is same as alpha beta plus alpha gamma. So these are the properties that axiomatizes a field. So what is a field basically? A field is something where we can do these 4 operations without any doubt: addition, multiplication, subtraction, and division by non-zero numbers. Examples of fields? Well, real numbers. In real numbers, you can do all these 4 operations. No, you don't have to subtract the 0, because I am saying that you can invert all non-zero numbers. So inversion is okay there. So all the real number set is a field. So when you talk about multiplicative inverse, you already take out the 0. So you don't have to worry about that. Yeah. Rational numbers are also, that also forms a field. What is a rational number? It's a ratio of 2 integers where the denominator is non-zero. Okay. There are other fields also, like for example the complex numbers, that is also a field. For us control engineers, there we see one more type of field. We look at rational functions, transfer functions. Transfer functions are also, they also come from a field. Yeah, because if you look at a transfer function and its denominator is non-zero, you can invert the function, and that is how you get an inverse system, right? An inverse filter. All right, but there are certain things which also we have seen, where out of these 4 operations, the last one you may or may not be able to do, that is the division by non-zero numbers, and such things are called commutative rings. So let me list out the properties of a commutative ring. So suppose the scripted A is called commutative ring if it has 2 binary operations. One we call the addition plus, and the other we call multiplication or dot, such that it has the following 4 properties, not 4, sorry, following 6 properties. Let us see whether 6 or more. Addition is commutative, that is a plus b is equal to b plus a for all a b in this set A. Number 2 is addition is associative, a plus b plus c is equal to a plus b plus c, that is true for all a b c. And third is presence of an additive identity. I hope these symbols mean the meaning of these symbols are clear to you. This means belongs to, this means for all. You should stop me whenever something is not clear to you. And there is additive inverse. Then 5 is multiplication is commutative. Multiplication is associative. Then we have additive multiplicative identity. And finally we have that okay. Example, don't worry about writing these down, I mean just remember it, it's already there in the note, so don't worry about writing. Example, so give me a commutative ring. Pardon? Digital? I'm not aware of what do you mean more specifically? Boolean algebra, okay, 0 and 1, the set of 0 and 1. Actually set of 0 and 1 is more than that, it's actually a field, it's a finite field, something that would be not finite. Any infinite commutative ring?
Integers.
Real numbers are already a field, so they are much more than this. So it's like a bit of a cheating calling real numbers as commutative rings. Of course they are, but they are a little more than commutative rings, so we don't call them commutative rings, we call them fields. Yeah, something. So here importantly, the important point to notice here is that for a we have a minus a such that a plus minus a is equal to 0. For a field we have, for every a we have an a inverse also if a is non-zero. Here we don't say anything about that. So the multiplicative inverse may not be there. Like in field we have anything that we have, we can invert it. Now inverting and multiplying is same as dividing, right? So here we are not saying anything about division. We are saying about addition, subtraction and just multiplication, no division. So can you think of a system of numbers where you are allowed to do addition, subtraction and multiplication but no division, not even by non-zero numbers? That will take you out from the set. You will no longer remain in that same set. If you divide, you are not going to reside in the same set. Do you have any example of such a system of numbers? Any guess? Matrices, very good, but matrices have a problem. Their multiplication is not commutative. So they do form a ring, but they are not a commutative ring, a non-commutative ring. Well, something much simpler than these, than the matrices do form a ring. Think of complex numbers are a field. You can divide by non-zero complex numbers. So 1 over a plus ib also makes sense if a and b both are non-zero. I mean, any of them non-zero is good enough. Think of integers. Somebody was saying natural numbers. Natural numbers are not okay because natural numbers, you don't have the negatives. So only 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 are the natural numbers. If you take -1, it's not a natural number. But if you look at integers, that is 0 plus -1 plus -2 plus -3 and so on, they do form a commutative ring. Yeah, they have a 0 in there. So let us check each of these properties. A plus b equal to b plus a, obviously, for integers. This 1, 2, 3 obvious, 4 is also obvious, 5 obvious, 6 obvious, 7 obvious, 8 obvious. All of them are satisfied by the set of integers. Okay.
You said that if you divide any of the member of that field, then it should be satisfied. It shouldn't be in that same set.
It's not there in the set. Like for example, look at 2.
But if we divide like any integer, like suppose 4 by 2, it will come in the same field.
But see, when you say 4 by 2, it's once again it's actually cheating. It's 2. But so it's not like that you just cannot divide. It means that sometimes you cannot divide by every non-zero. Sometimes if you divide, then it takes you out. Like for example, take 1 and 2. You try to divide 1 by 2, you get half. Half is not there. When you say I'm allowed to divide, it means you should be allowed to divide a by b the moment b is non-zero, for every a, for every b, provided b is not 0. That does not happen here. That is why there is no division here. Any other example of a ring, of a commutative ring, something that is a little more complicated than integers? Yes. I hope you are aware of this symbol. This means reals. This symbol, are you aware of this symbol? What does this mean? Huh? No, xi to you know. Forget about the meaning of forget about the meaning that xi has as a differential operator. Just think of it as a symbol. It doesn't have any differentiation or property or anything. It's just a symbol. It could be my name, it could be your name, anything. It's just some placeholder. So this symbol is going to be of utmost importance for this course. This symbol means it is the collection of all polynomials with real coefficients. This is the set of polynomials in the variable xi with coefficients from the real number set R. An example of a typical element from this ring. Sorry, I let out the cat already from the hat. Okay, a typical element from this set would look like, we'll call it, let's say, f xi, and it looks like a0 plus a1 xi plus a2 xi squared plus dot 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 up to an xi to the power n. Such a thing is called a polynomial. Now here is the thing. This set of all polynomials, oh by the way, these numbers, these a0, a1, all of them, they are real numbers. So I want you to notice that this set of all polynomials with real coefficients, they form a ring, they form a commutative ring. You see, once again we come back to our properties of a ring. Can you add two polynomials? Of course you can, and you get another polynomial. Is that addition commutative? I mean, does it matter? You add f xi with g xi, f plus g is same as g plus f. So first one goes through. What about second one? I'm sure you can see that the second one also goes through. Third one?
Yes.
Yes, because 0 is a polynomial also. It's a 0 polynomial. What about fourth? True. 5? True. 6? True. 7? True. 8? True. It's a commutative ring. And indeed you can observe that, you see, if you look at a polynomial, in general it may not be invertible. For example, if I have, let's say, xi plus 1, can I have 1 over xi plus 1? Is it a polynomial? It's not an infinite series. It doesn't have a meaning as a polynomial. The infinite series holds only if you have things like xi has value less than or equal to 1, less than 1. Its magnitude is less than 1. But here we don't associate any value to xi, it's just a symbol. So 1 over xi plus 1, when we say that it's equal to 1 plus xi square and so on, that makes sense as a formal power series, and that makes sense as, you know, when you play around with this thing with such formal power series, it becomes convergent only when xi magnitude is less than 1. Yeah, so those things we are not allowing here. We don't have formal power series. Our polynomials all have finite degree. Formal power series have degree, there is no concept of a degree at all. But here we are looking at only finite degree polynomials. So 1 over xi plus 1 is not a polynomial. So xi plus 1 is not invertible. But unlike integers, where only plus 1 and minus 1 are invertible, see, plus 1 minus 1 you can invert even in integers. Once again you get plus 1 and minus 1. Yeah, unlike that, for polynomial rings, you take any constant. Suppose you take the number 1, that is also a polynomial, right? It has degree 0, or number 2, 3, any real number, pi, whatever. All these numbers which are also polynomials, those polynomials are invertible because they are coming from a field. Any other polynomial is not invertible. So in other words, any polynomial of degree strictly greater than 0 is not invertible. That is why this forms a ring, forms a commutative ring. Okay, good. Now, so you yeah, pardon?
What is the difference between ring and field?
Ring and field?
They are same or
No, of course not. Field has inverses, multiplicative inverses. Rings do not have multiplicative inverses for all non-zero elements. For some elements there would be inverses, for some elements there wouldn't be any inverses.
this property for the field or for the ring?
When you don't have inverses, that is for ring. When you have inverses, then it's a field. So, okay, every field is a ring, not every ring is a field. Are there any Bengalis here? Yeah, Krop Khari Kharo, Krop Kharo Ki Kharno, something like that. Whatever, forget it. Yeah, yes,
For example, if you have to add two polynomials,
yeah,
1 plus x,
correct.
second one is 1 plus x is filled to polynomial.
Pardon?
1 plus x is filled to
Field 2.
power base. Only 0 and 1 is coefficients.
Okay, yeah, correct.
So it is filled to
1 plus, so polynomials. So if you mean this one, suppose I denote by f2
f2.
the field 0 1, field containing 0 1. Then if you have f2 xi, this also is a ring.
So one polynomial 1 plus x which is over f2.
Mm-hmm.
Another polynomial
let's say again 1 plus x, which is again f2.
Yeah. You add the 2, you get 0. Fine.
Addition of this 2 plus 2, which is not f2.
But 2 is 0. So in F2 you define 1 plus 1 to be equal to 0. You define it that way, right? So that way there is no harm in doing this addition. Yeah, anything else? Okay. All right. So now we come to the central character of this movie. So for a commutative ring, there are these special subsets which will be of importance for us. These subsets satisfy the property that, so they satisfy two properties. Number one, whenever you have two elements belonging to this set A. Oh, by the way, are you worried about this symbol? Yeah, this is okay. This is called this is a German A or a Gothic A. So a lot of this commutative algebra stuff were developed in Germany. There was a university called Göttingen, where there was this big algebraist, big mathematician called David Hilbert. He had a lot of influence on these things. So perhaps, I'm not sure though. Yeah, perhaps for that reason this German A has got stuck for such type of sets. You know, have you ever wondered? So do you know the letter by which integer, the set of integers, is denoted? Z. Why Z? Why not I? Integers is I, right? Why Z? Real numbers is R, complex numbers is C, natural numbers is N, whole numbers is W, but integers is Z. Do you know why? Because in German there is a word called Zahl. Like in Marathi we have Zala, no? Same Zahl, that same sound. Zahl means integers, numbers. That is why Z-A-H-L. That is why Z stands for integers. Anyways, okay. So if A and B are from this set, then this implies A plus B is also in this set. Number two, for all A, once again from this set, and now for all B inside the commutative ring, we should have A times B to be inside this set. If this subset A satisfies this property, these two properties, then this subset A is called an ideal. Yeah. So those of you who have seen some amount of vector space linear algebra would immediately recall similar stuff over vector spaces. In vector spaces you know about subspaces, right? Subspaces are such that, so how many of you know about subspaces? Can you raise your hands? Oh, once again, not too many. Anyways, doesn't matter. Just think of these two properties. Well, the first one says that, so in words it means the set A is closed under addition. That means you pick arbitrary elements from that set, add them, you get something, you stay inside the set, you don't go out. On the other hand, if you look at any element in that set and multiply by any element from the ring, from the bigger set, you still stay inside the smaller set. Let me give you an example and it will be crystal clear. For example, in the integer ring, look at all even integers. That forms an ideal. You see, you add two even integers, you get an even integer. You take an even integer and you multiply it by any integer whatsoever, that will still be an even integer. Notice that the set of all odd integers, that is not an ideal, because you see, take two odd integers, add them up, you get an even integer. Yeah. So not only that, think of, say, look at this set 0 plus minus n for some integer n, plus minus 2n, plus minus 3n, and so on. This is an ideal. See, this is a subset of Z. So not every integer is there, it's a proper subset. But still, you see, you add two numbers. Suppose I take 2n and 5n, I add them. What do I get? I get 7n. That is a part of this set already. Once again, I take 2n and I multiply it by any number, say 10 to the power minus 10 to the power 4. So 5n times 10 to the power 4 is 5 into 10 to the power 4 times n, that is also a part of this set. Yeah, so this is an ideal. So now, for example, suppose we have, in fact, suppose A is the commutative ring, and suppose let's say alpha is an element of this ring A, and now we look at this set. We take beta, we multiply it with alpha, and we vary beta over all possible elements in the ring. This itself forms an ideal. See, this is going to be a subset. Oops. This is going to be a subset of A, and it's going to be an ideal. Are you with me? So this is exactly like the way we have formed this 0 plus minus n plus minus 2n and so on. This set can also be written as the collection of all m times n, where m is an integer. That is essentially what we have done here also, but for a general ring. Yeah.
If we multiply n with 2n, then we get something that is not in this.
It is there.
Well, it will be 2n square, right?
2n square, but that can be written as 2n times n, where 2n is a number. So that is also of this form. So why did I broach this thing? Broach this type of a construction of an ideal, because that is what is going to be important for us. Like, suppose we have the polynomial ring R psi, and then suppose somebody gives us this polynomial G psi. We can look at all f psi times G psi, where f psi's are all possible arbitrary polynomials from the polynomial ring. This is going to form an ideal, and this ideal, see, this ideal is just like taking linear combinations. Yeah, you just have to broaden your mind. This G is like a generator, it's like a vector which is being multiplied by other scalars coming from the ring. Okay, that is why this ideal is generated by this element G. So that the standard notation for that is this one. We say that it is the ideal generated by G. If you broaden your mind a little further, one can also get ideals generated by multiple elements. For example, one can have ideal generated by two elements, which are essentially given by all possible polynomial linear combinations should be F1. Instead of just taking linear combination with a single polynomial, now you have two polynomials and you take all possible linear combinations, but the coefficients are coming from ring, from the polynomial ring. So you have f1 xi times g1 xi, it is like alpha 1 times v1, and then f2 xi times g2 xi. You are looking at all possible such linear combinations. That forms an ideal generated by g1 and g2. Similarly, you can have, just a second, you can have n generators g1 up to gn, and you can have the ideal generated by g1, g2, so on. Yeah, Shoreen, yes.
The second step, sir, what's the inverse?
Inverse, where?
No, no, I mean, that symbol, second line.
Here?
Second line after 0, comma, plus minus n. First line is that.
No, no.
A belongs to alpha.
Oh, this one.
Is it
This one?
is it different from belongs?
No, it's not different from. So this is same as alpha is in A. Because I write the alpha on the right side, that's why I had to use this symbol. Sorry. This is okay, it's a standard symbol, it's used. In LaTeX it is written as Ni. For epsilon, and for this one you use in. Okay, any questions at this point? Is it becoming too hard?
Give some examples.
Yes, I will give an example. Okay. If I write this, what do I mean? It is the ideal generated by 2. So what should I get? N into 2. So I take n to be equal to 0, so that gives me 0. Correct? I take n to be equal to 1, that gives me 2. I take n to be equal to minus 1, that gives me minus 2. I take n to be equal to plus 2, that gives me 4. I take n to be equal to minus 2, that gives me minus 4. So I continue like this. Pictorially, if this is my number line, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on, minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, minus 4, minus 5. Then the ideal picks out 0, 2, 4, 6, minus 2, minus 4, so on, this collection. Have we seen it before? Obviously, this is the set of odd, set of even numbers, even integers. That's an ideal. What if we look at 3, the ideal generated by 3? Anyone? 0 plus minus 3, then plus minus 6, plus minus 9, so on. Ideal, now I am sure you can tell me what is the ideal generated by, let us say 10. 0 plus minus 10 plus minus 20 plus minus 30. So a pattern emerges, right? The ideal generated by a number n collects all the numbers that are divisible by n. Yeah. Now suppose I have ideal generated by 4, 6. What should this mean? Give me a typical element here. Yeah. 0 definitely is there. 12 is there. Is 4 there? 4 is there, because you can write 4 to be equal to 1 times 4 plus 0 times 6, isn't it? Because everything in this ideal is something that looks like, you see, n1 times 4 plus n2 times 6, where you have to choose n1 and n2 properly. So 4 is definitely there and 6 is also there. As you have said, 12 is also there. 10, yeah, 10 is also there. 11 is there? No, 11 is not there. 8 is there. 2 times 4 plus 0 times 6. Similarly, you can have ideals generated by more elements. You can have ideals generated by 2, 6, 9, 11. The elements of this typically looks like n1 times 2 plus n2 times 6 plus n3 times 9 plus n4 times 11, where n1, n2, n3, n4 are integers. Is that all right? Okay. Now here is this important thing. Okay, before we move along, yeah, okay. Now tell me, we come back to polynomials, and suppose we have the polynomial, okay, the easiest possible polynomial, it says xi. Just xi is a polynomial. Let's see what should be there. Is 0 there? Definitely. What else? Plus minus xi definitely is there. Anything else? Is xi square there?
No.
It is. Xi square is divisible by xi. So xi square is also there. In fact, xi to the power 4 plus xi cube plus xi squared plus xi. Is it there? Is it there? No. So anything that is divisible by xi is there. In fact, any polynomial whose constant coefficient is 0, the constant term is 0, that polynomial is there in this ideal. What if we have xi squared and xi plus 1? What do we have? Xi square is definitely there. Xi plus 1 is also there. Anything else? Xi is also there, because you can have xi square minus xi square plus xi. Yeah, so you get the idea of how ideals are. Okay. Now, how do ideals come into the picture in our case? We were dealing with differential equations, right? Yeah, but how do ideals come into the picture? So let us, if we go back to the point where we were doing this differential equation business, if you remember, we had two polynomial differential operators, xi cube plus 2 xi plus 1 and xi to the power 4 plus xi squared plus 2 xi plus 3. Yeah, go back to the previous notes. We had these two polynomials. Of course, xi there meant the derivative d dt, but if we just view it as a symbol, it was just like this, just the way we for control we replace d dt by s, no, the Laplace variable. Xi also does more or less roughly the same thing. Let us call this polynomial as g1 xi and this as g2 xi. Okay, I shouldn't write here, I should write, okay, let's write it here. So now I define the ideal A, is it visible? I define the ideal A to be the one that is generated by these two polynomials, correct? You have already seen an element from this ideal when Shorin had suggested that we multiply, we differentiate once and then we subtract. That essentially meant we take g2 xi and do this thing, g2 xi minus xi times g1 xi. That's an element from the ideal. So this ideal has infinitely many elements. Now we can pick typical elements from there and replace xi by d dt, that will give us a polynomial differential operator, and we can make that polynomial differential operator act on our trajectory y and look at this differential equation, that suppose some f xi is there in this ideal, and we look at this differential equation d dt y is equal to 0. So I claim at this point that among those infinitely many such polynomials in this ideal, there is one polynomial, there is one Rajinikanth, which is such that Rajinikanth's equation is equivalent to the original system of equations. That means the solution sets are going to be the same. That is like a huge benefit. Instead of handling multiple equations, if I have to handle only one single equation, that is like a huge benefit. The question is, how do we get that? How do we get that particular differential equation? So we'll see all the details about that in the next class, but before we go today, I'll just quickly where is the schedule? What is the next thing now? Yeah. Lecture by Gadre sir at 5:30, right? Okay. So we'll finish. We have 5 minutes time. I'll just take those 5 minutes and we'll be done for today. Yeah. Okay. So first, I make the claim that suppose we have polynomials g1, g2 up to gm. All of them are polynomials, yeah? And we look at the ideal generated by them. I say, okay, there exists a polynomial g, such that the ideal generated by this m elements is same as the ideal generated by this single guy, our Rajinikanth. How do we get that? Because there is a very interesting proof of that fact. Yeah, but I don't think 5 minutes would be sufficient for that. Let me just give you some hint, and then we'll wrap up, and then we'll see the details in the next class. Look at integers. Suppose we have 2 and 4, the ideal generated by 2 and 4. Can you tell me a single element, a single integer which will generate the same ideal as the ideal generated by 2 and 4? 2. Who said that? You? What is your name? Ashok. Ashok, right? Ashok Shinde. Yeah. So it's the ideal generated by 2. Exactly. Suppose we have the ideal generated by 2 and 3. It is the ideal generated by 1, and if it is ideal generated by 1, then it means it's the entire ring, because the ideal generated by 1 is everything, right? You multiply 1 by an integer, so you get all the possible integers. If we had 4 and 6, what is the ideal? Is there a single element? Is it 2? Sure? Do you see the pattern emerging? So if I have in general two integers n1 and n2, not n2 minus n1, not always. We were lucky at that point that it was 2. Somebody said LCM. HCF, it's the GCD, greatest common divisor. In fact, the greatest common divisor, if that number is n, then that generates the entire ideal. It turns out that for polynomials also one can define GCD. You have two polynomials, you can define the GCD of that. Have you heard of this thing before? GCD of polynomials? So that is what we will see in the next class, how GCDs of polynomials can be computed and how they generate the ideal. Yeah, and we will see how it can be applied to solving differential equations. Thank you.